So basically, there was a group of Muslims, particularly in 19th century Egypt, who began to say, this is our problem. We abandoned the rationalist model and took this super-rationalist or spiritual model, and we've forgotten the world. Whereas the Christians, who for centuries abandoned the world, took this rational model and begin to explore the world, to discover the secrets of the world, and ultimately gain power and ascendancy in a way that now even the heartland of Islam is threatened and being defeated. And so they created a type of neo-rationalist school, right? And within that school, probably the greatest proponent is an Egyptian reformist named Muhammad Abdu, who becomes Sheikh al-Azhar in 1900. He takes the Azhari school, which is really this is the Harvard of the Muslim world. He takes that school and begins to introduce modernist ideas, that Islam needs to be reformed. So you get reformers, and there becomes a secularization of Islam. The Muslims become embarrassed of their spiritual tradition. In the spiritual tradition, there was a lot of belief in the miracles of the saints, in the idea of sainthood, what's called wilaya in the Arabic language, of a very strong tradition of not becoming too engaged in the world, taking only from the world what you need, and really not being extravagant and things like that, and really seeing this as something related to the very core of Islam, and using the Prophet ﷺ as the example, as the model of somebody who was not deeply engaged in the world, although he was a worldly prophet in the sense that he was very concerned with society, with justice in society, with establishing a strong social basis for his teaching. Despite that, his own personal life was one of, in a sense, a deep abandonment of the luxuries of the world. There's a famous tradition. He slept on a mat on the floor, and they said that the palm fibers used to be shown, the traces of it on his face. And once Omar was sitting with him, and he began to weep, and he asked Omar, "Why are you weeping?" And he said, "Because I've been to Syria and seen how the Roman rulers live in the opulence. And then I look at you, the Prophet of God, living like this. It makes me sad." And the Prophet smiled at him and said, aren't you pleased that this is for them, they have this world, and for us is the next world? This type of, within the Islamic tradition, was very, very much the norm until the late 19th century. And so you get a change. And so now what you will find, and there's a book I really would recommend, given that, in a sense, you're becoming now, within, certainly in the American framework, experts on Islam, right? After you finish this 2 weeks, you will be considered within your schools and within your environments to have a type of expertise about Islam that other people don't have, that's one, a very important responsibility, and two, a type of absurdity, as we all know. Right? Because none of us, I did my degree at the university in comparative religions, and you can't, any one religion, I haven't even explored Islam to its fullest, anywhere near it. Buddhism is just an incredible tradition, massive intellectual tradition, massive spiritual tradition. If I spent my entire life just studying Buddhism, I would not exhaust even probably one of the schools of Buddhism. So this is true of any religion that has any substance to it. And certainly Islam is, it is one of the greatest of the religions of man, if not, but certainly the Muslims would consider it, but even I think many secularist historians would consider it certainly either the first or the second. Christianity will be in there, depending on which historian you're looking at. Michael Hart definitely considered it, of all the Prophet Muhammad, as being the most successful religious teacher in the history of human societies, the impact that he's had on cultures and civilizations. So the point of all this is that the book that I was going to recommend, is called The Failure of Political Islam by Roy Olivier. I think it's a brilliant book. He's not a Muslim. He's a French intellectual who originally did studies in Afghanistan. But he really studied very seriously the modern political scene in the Muslim world. And I think he gives a brilliant analysis of what's called fundamentalism. It's called The Failure of Political Islam by Roy Olivier. Roy Olivier. It's French. If you're used to reading French intellectuals, you know it's got a little bit of that in there. They tend to be abstruse, almost purposely. But the basic gist of his argument is that what happened within the Muslim world is that there was a radical secularization within the elite, the intellectual elites of the Muslim world. Many of them adopted socialism and communism as ways of dealing with colonialism. You will see Algeria is a good example of this, right? Ahmed Ben Bella, Boumediene. These are, the revolutionaries that free their countries from the yoke of colonialism. Another example is Libya, right? The Jamahiriya. I mean, he's a socialist in his views. Jamal Abdel Nasser, who's kind of switching back and forth, but basically a socialist worldview. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, a communist organization, right, from inception. The idea was definitely the oppressed versus the oppressed within a dialectical, this Marxist dialectic. Well, with also Iraq, the Ba'athist Party, socialist. Syria, socialist. We forget this, that how deeply this Marxist idea moves into the Muslim world. Yemen, communist. The communists take over Yemen. Communism traditionally has seen religion as an enemy, the opiate of the masses. This in the Muslim world was a little more difficult because of the depth of the sacred tradition still within those. And so the type of communism, the socialism, there's almost let's reinterpret our tradition. The Prophet was a communist, right? And there's some of the Western, people said this about Jesus, the original communitarian. The disciples are giving up all their possessions for the poor. So you get, and now you have within the Catholic Church a very strong Marxist tradition, liberation theology. Sandinistas, many of the people within the Sandinista were very devout. Ernesto Cardenal was a Jesuit priest. He becomes the minister of culture in Nicaragua. So within the Catholic Church, particularly in the so-called oppressed lands like Brazil and these places, you find within Christianity a Marxist redaction of the Christian teaching. And it's very appealing. You mix Marxism and Christianity to the masses, or Marxism becomes very appealing if you're oppressed. And suddenly your oppression doesn't have to be a materialistic, but now you can be oppressed for the sake of God. Right? It's a little easier to bear than purely a. So what happens is as communism begins to crumble, right? People, what are we going to do? Socialism fails. It fails in Algeria. It fails in Egypt. It fails in Iraq. It fails in Syria. Well, Islam. Oh, why didn't we see this before? Right? We used to be great. We had the Bani Umayyah. We had the Abbasids. We had the Ottoman Empire. We were great. We were ruling the world. People looked at us. We were the superpower. We were the big guy on the block. And why was that? Well, because God's grace was on us. Right? And a lot of Americans believe this. Right? I mean, Reagan was very much in that vein of manifest destiny. America has a divine mission. Right? The Americans, God bless America. Right? There is an idea that when somebody's up at the top, that God sheds His grace on us. This is divine grace. I mean, we wouldn't have all this stuff if God wasn't pleased with us, which is alien to the Quranic worldview, by the way. The Quran says if God gives man a lot, then man says, oh, God's pleased with me. And if He gives him a hard time, man says, He's angry at me, He's upset with me. Whereas from the Quranic worldview, the testing is good and evil. You're tested with want and abundance, that they're both tests from God.